the recess appointment power, which is contained in the Constitution, it's plain text, black reading of the law, sits right next to the other way of getting your team, the president's team, into their executive branch jobs. So you can either go through the Senate, where the Senate has the power to advise and consent, as you just alluded to, or you can do a recess appointment, which does not involve advice and consent. So there are other parameters around it that we can get into. So what I want to emphasize here is this is not specifically a way to go around the U.S. Senate. The point of using the recess power is that the president is entitled to his team, and he shouldn't be expected to have to wait months and months and months to have people in their seats doing their jobs, administering the government in the way that the president would have them administer it. That's unreasonable. And in fact, it hinders his ability to do his job as president of the United States. So the recess power is contained within Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution. And it simply says that in the event that there is a recess of Congress, the president can appoint officials into executive branch agencies. End of story.
Okay. Let me steel man the other side. Yes, Eric, it does. But the intent of that was, let's say back in 1789, the Congress, the Senate and the House weren't in session, and there was some emergency that we needed to appoint someone for. And it's 1979, so the senator from Georgia is very far away from D.C. No time to hop on a horse and get there. So the president just has to appoint someone and get it done now, and then we can worry about confirming them later. But we need someone who has the authority to do what they need to do at this very moment. What do you say to that?
A couple of thoughts. First of all, that certainly would be an application of a recess power. I don't deny that. It is also true that Congress was in session a lot less back at the founding era. And so it would have been unreasonable for the president to just have these positions wait to be filled until Congress came back into the session for just the 2 or 3 months that they tended to work in those days. And that gets back to where I started. It's that exact same principle that is at stake here. The president is entitled to his team. And back in the founding era, it was the case that when a president submitted a nominee to Congress for consideration, they would sometimes receive that nominee and take an up or down vote on them on the same day. And so you knew, advice and consent, up or down, let's roll. Well, today it can take 5 months before that person gets considered. It's unreasonable. It's unconstitutional. And the recess power is one tool in the toolkit that would enable the president to have his team in place. And oh, by the way, if you do a recess appointment, most often through history, presidents also submit that person for consideration through the other constitutional process so that they can eventually be confirmed. Because if they're not, their recess appointment term will expire. Last thing I'll say on this point is that the example that you just gave, even if it were true initially, is belied by practice for the last 250 years, where many presidents have made hundreds of recess appointments, none of which fell within the parameters that you just described, including recent presidents Biden, Obama, Bush, and Clinton.
Okay. Again, I'm just pushing back for devil's argument. Is there a difference between those recess appointments and what Trump has threatened to do here, which would be to force a recess or make some sort of arbitrary recess for only the purpose of getting these guys through on a recess appointment? And is that, what's the right word? I don't want to say unfair or unjust. Is that not appropriate?
Great question. And there is something about the potential of this happening that would be new in American history. I would just remind that new does not mean wrong, and it certainly does not mean unconstitutional. It just means it hasn't been done before. So the same power of recess appointment that is found in Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution sits beside another power, which is the power to both convene and adjourn Congress. So the Constitution says that the House cannot adjourn for more than 3 days without the permission of the Senate. And conversely, the Senate cannot adjourn for more than 3 days without the permission of the House. So there's something...
Really? That's interesting.
Yep, that exists.
I don't want to derail you, but why?
That's a good question. Yeah, I assume that the framers had something in mind when they decided that. I'm not entirely sure. It may have been that they were looking to avoid gimmicky gamesmanship, where one.
Yeah. So that's right. So we both. Hey guys, listen. You can't send it. You just can't leave. Like we got stuff to do.
Exactly. Precisely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
That's my
okay.
best
Sorry,
guess.
I didn't mean to derail.
Yeah, no, not at all. It's relevant. Okay. So then the question arises: well, what happens if one of them wants to adjourn and the other one doesn't? And my read of the Constitution is that the framers provided a tiebreaker, and that's the President of the United States. So in a situation where there's a disagreement and one body wants to adjourn and the other takes no action or fails to pass the concurrent resolution to adjourn, that opens up this possibility where all of a sudden now the president has the constitutional power, black letter of the law, to say there's a disagreement between the House and the Senate as to the time of adjournment. I am going to either adjourn them to the time and date of my choosing, or I'm going to not adjourn them at all, and they have to stay in session. Conversely, that also contains the power to convene. So in other words, if the House and Senate are out and the president recognizes that, hey, we need y'all here doing work, he also has the power to bring them back to Washington to get to work. That power, the convening power, has been exercised dozens of times in American history, though not recently. The most recent time that I found was in 1948 when Harry Truman brought Congress back under what's called the turn-up session for reasons that I don't understand. But the point is that the president gets to tell Congress when to come back and do its work or when to go home. And so what you would have is a situation that's never been exercised before, where let's just say that Mike Johnson's House passes a concurrent resolution that says we're going to adjourn for 15 days, starting on X date. And the Senate takes no action on that, or it's brought to the floor and it's voted down. That would be a disagreement between the houses, and President Trump would have the constitutional authority to say, you're going home for as long as I say. And it matters the length of the adjournment, because you can only do a recess appointment. And this gets into a Supreme Court case called Noel Canning in 2014, where the court said to Barack Obama, you do have the power to make recess appointments, but not when the recess is only 3 days long. That's too short. It has to be at least 10 days long.
And that is something that the Supreme Court just made up, the 10 days.
Pretty much made it up. It's certainly not in the Constitution, although reading through the decision, they tried to look at what had been practiced. As I mentioned, there have been hundreds of recess appointments over 250 years. And what they saw was that in most cases, Congress had recessed for like at least 10 days. So they just drew the line there.
Okay. So I think we're talking with Eric Teetsel he's the vice president of the Center for Renewing America. So I think you and I did a pretty good on the spot thinking of a scenario why the founders made it so that both the House and the Senate have to agree with the other person's adjournment or whatever. Right? Okay, that makes sense. Why, though, would the founders have wrote this in the Constitution, what you're speaking of? It says the president may, this is in the Constitution, the president may, on extraordinary occasions, convene both houses, or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he, the president, shall think proper. I think we can come up with a scenario where the president's like, "Hey, everyone, they just attacked Pearl Harbor. We got to get back to work." What's a scenario where the founders would have thought that the president would need to adjourn everybody?
Great question. I guess you could go back and see if the Federalist Papers speak to this, if there's other writing contemporary to the framing where they talk about this. It may have been for political reasons. It may have been to instigate recess appointments. I don't know off the top of my head exactly why they would have done that. All that I know is that they did, and therefore it's the law, and it's a power that every president has held, and that every future president will hold, barring some change to the Constitution.
Okay. Well, so has a president ever done that? Has a president ever adjourned the House and the Senate?
There was an incident in, I think it was 1801, where John Adams did something that kind of smells like this, although it was a little different because it was during a lame duck just before the end of his presidency. Nothing like what we're talking about has been done in American history. No.
Okay. So I don't care about norms. Like we hear the media talk about norms all the time. I don't care, but I do want to be prudent. If it gets to this, and I actually don't think it will, but I do appreciate this exercise still. But would we be doing something that would create a precedent that would hurt us later, like getting rid of the filibuster or something like that?
Right. This is a great question and a really important one. The first point is, you're right. I suppose you have to look at this through the lens of norms and whatever power norms might have or may once have had. I would argue that we are long past the age of norms at a time when the Department of Justice has been weaponized against their political opponents and people of faith, when the IRS is leaking people's tax returns, and we can go on and on and on through the violation of basic democratic norms that we have seen from the Democratic Party and the progressive movement lately. So I'm more like you. I'm less concerned with norms and much more concerned with reviving a robust constitutionalism.